Yes, hello. My name is Dominic Ziegler, and I write the Economist's weekly Banyan column on Asian affairs. A very warm welcome to this discussion, the Economic Recovery, a Fine Balancing Act. And I'm joined today by four terrific panelists. Elim Shritaba of Asia Pulp and Paper Sinarmas, Kevin O'Rourke of Reformati Information Services, Shinta Kamdani of the Syntesa Group, and Winfried Wicklein, Country Director for the Asian Development Bank. You're all extremely welcome. Now, today we're going to look at the policies that will affect Indonesia as it attempts to emerge from a really tough pandemic year. We're going to look at how businesses are managing risk and look at how the government can balance economic relief with long-term development. We're going to ask how Indonesia has fared coming out of this pandemic. What are the lessons learned? How can the Omnibus Bill support Indonesia's recovery? In what ways does it perhaps risk undermining it? How can Indonesia move up the value chain? And once the economy opens, which sectors really should be a priority? So Vinny, if I could please ask you to kick off with some sort of lessons from the pandemic. How has Indonesia fared? And in terms of the lessons, how to emerge from the past difficult year in ways that produce not just any old growth, but growth that is stronger, greener, and smarter.
Well, thanks, Dominic. Let me. You asked me a couple of questions there. Let me try to unpack them one by one. So how has Indonesia fared during the pandemic? I think overall they've been doing actually quite a good job given the unprecedented nature of the pandemic. So you have the health, the pandemic front. The situation obviously remains to be very challenging. It's not fully clear where we really stand because of lack of data and lack of testing and tracing capacity. And Indonesia was struggling in the early days of the pandemic, but now I think the last couple of months or so, with very strong and dynamic leadership in place, the Ministry of Health has taken some very sound measures to respond to the pandemic. Infections are in check, hospital capacity is manageable, and we are seeing the vaccination rollout going quite well so far, which is super critical for the recovery. On the economic front, on the other side, the very clear verdict is that crisis management has been quite strong by all measures. I think Indonesia has learned a lot from the Asian financial crisis. The Indonesian economic management team has been very proactive, innovative, and implemented rather effective policies. You know, the 47+ billion economic recovery program, lifting of the temporary lifting of deficit ceilings, burden sharing, etc. Importantly, the three main players in that group, Ministry of Finance, Bank Indonesia, OJK, they have coordinated very closely amongst themselves, and importantly, they have communicated very well and regularly with the markets. So I think as a result, Indonesia has fared relatively better than most countries in the region, and frankly, worldwide. Last year, the GDP went down by just 2.1%, rather modest drop, and for 2021, I think the consensus data is still coming in, but I think the Bank Indonesia's span of 4.3 to 5.3% growth for 2021 is probably quite realistic. So not so bad. But that all said, the crisis has been very disruptive, literally for everyone, for the people, for businesses, for government, and most tragically, as all so often, the ones hit hardest are those who are already in a very difficult place to start with before the pandemic: the poor, the marginalized, women who are now taking on additional caring responsibilities, children who are missing out on school, etc. Poverty we had celebrated in 2019 that it went single digit down after, over the last 20, 30 years from very high 30% down to single digits. But now, of course, COVID will have increased the number of poor people substantially. We see the numbers, and they're still coming in, but if calculated against the national poverty line, which is roughly $1 per day, just below 3 million people slipped back into poverty just on the back of COVID. But actually, frankly, if you calculate against the $3.2 a day threshold, which should be applied for middle-income countries internationally, the number should be a multiple of that. We also know the micro and small businesses especially are struggling to survive. And these are indicators of people that are in the process of slipping back into poverty. Half of the micro and small enterprises that we recently surveyed, many Kadden members amongst them, had to temporarily close, cut staff, and reported that they had no more savings to draw on. I've seen estimates that between last August or last February, just before the crisis and well into the crisis, some 30 million people lost jobs or were put on reduced work hours. We also see anecdotal evidence and from some surveys that food insecurity may become a concern. But then on a positive note, on all those vulnerabilities, I'm very sure that the poverty rate outcomes would have been much higher if it was not for the very pretty good delivery of the government's social assistance program during the pandemic. It was just beefed up in the years before the pandemic, and reached a lot of the affected people. And according to surveys that we've seen, was particularly effective with the poorest household. So all in all, COVID has certainly reversed some of Indonesia's hard-won development gains.
Thank you, Vinny. And just follow up with a quick question. Indonesia's anti-poverty assistance throughout the pandemic also managed to reach those in the informal sector, did it? And just if I could ask you at the same time, I mean, the ADB is committing $1.5 billion to Indonesia's COVID response. Just briefly, where is that going, and what does that money aim to do?
Yeah, so the poorest and those in the informal sector, they're registered with the Ministry of Social Affairs, and the databases were they're quite good. They need to be better integrated and etc. But they have reached. We understand, and we have from surveys we have some evidence that they have reached, and particularly reached the poorest. Which is very important. Now, our support, we supported the PEN, the Economic Recovery Program, with $1.5 billion. But more importantly, we brought with us co-financiers, which put together that made was a $4.5 billion package, much larger than our $1.5 billion. And that went into the health, into social assistance, into support of micro and small enterprises. We have been monitoring this very closely with Ministry of Finance, involving private sector and civil society, and are actually quite pleased with the progress. We identify as we monitor areas for improvement, and these are very well taken by the government that is keen to improve as we go along.
Thank you, Vinny. Ibu Shinta, I'd love to turn to you for the company perspective. I mean, your business portfolios run across a great range of sectors: property, energy, industrials, consumer products. Just firstly, how has the crisis affected your businesses? What changes do you see? Do you see any signs of recovery? What measures that the government has offered have been helpful to you? What measures would you like to see in future that help business climb out of this, create jobs again, and return to health?
Thank you, Dominic. Perhaps I can also use my hat as the vice chairperson of the Indonesia Chamber of Commerce and Industry, so that it gives a larger perspective of this is what's happening, business in general in Indonesia. I think Vinny clearly outlined, what's happening on the ground, but perhaps I will give a little bit more sense from the business perspective. I think, of course, the government is trying to control the pandemic, and I think the rollout has been quite significant. Progress has been good, but I want to mention specific thing that has really impacted a lot of businesses, including us, which is the on and off tightening of the local lockdown measures. And I think this creates a big uncertainty, especially on the business productivity and constraint to mobility of goods and people, which effectively weaken the domestic consumer confidence to expand the consumption. So as you see, the government has come up with many of the stimulus, but I think the control of the pandemic is really important, because we have been trying to follow with all the health protocols, factories following, the very tight health protocol, but we do believe that that's not sufficient. And that's why we've seen Indonesia moving forward, as there's two aspects that's very important. One is basically how to control the pandemic. And that's not enough just with the health protocols, but we need to really look at it from the vaccination program that needs to be rolled out. That's why we are also initiating our own support for our government on the vaccination program, because we see it's very important. The second, obviously, is how to recover its economy. And I think the stimulus has been given by government, but we also need to continue with the structural reform, and we'll talk perhaps more about it later. We believe that Indonesia fiscal support is obviously helpful, but obviously to also blanket Indonesia from extreme poverty and deeper recession, but it's too minimal to keep business afloat, and the distribution is not as timely as what the business wants. So the delay of the distribution causes many businesses to resort to termination workers or closure of even businesses. Now we have—
And Ibu Shinta, if I could interrupt you just briefly, what is causing the delay? Is it just bureaucracy? Is it poor decisions about allocating where help should go? What's at the root of the problem?
I think that primarily, if we look at the biggest issue right now, is obviously got to do with the facility, right? The credit facilities that businesses have. So we're talking about the stimulus to cooperation out of the PAN program. Actually, started last year, for example, has only been utilized very minimal, because businesses could not fully restructure its credits and also get new capital to for business recovery. And this has to do more with the banking system, because what happened is even now the government already give a guarantee for the bank to be able to roll out the stimulus. Of course, we have a lot of challenges of the banks being able to do this. And so restructuring of credit, especially, the small, medium enterprises is one thing, but I think for businesses, especially those medium businesses, has been very, very challenging, because the banking sector has especially concerned, especially on the viability, the moral hazard. As you know, Indonesia has experienced this in the past. So that's, I think, one key area that needs to be paid attention to. So the restructuring program is not as fast as what we would want expected. And also, if we look at the restructuring program right now, the rate of the interest rate for a loan facility, especially, is still very, very high. So even though some companies are able to restructure, it will be a big challenge when we come to next year, the following year, when they have to go back to start paying the level of interest rate that companies need to pay. So things like this, I think, is to be paid attention to. But Dominic, I also want to touch specifically on the impact to the manpower, because I think this is very, very important. If we look at the workforce at the moment, as you know, the structure of Indonesia workforce, 55% is in the informal sectors, and this has increased tremendously because of COVID to about 70%. So this is very, very significant. And when we look at the workforce, about 24.9 million people infected. It's not just about the termination, but of course about losing a lot of their income. And I think this is really a big, big issue that, the unpaid leave, a lot of the workforce are not getting the income that they're supposed to. So this is really, I think, a big issue that government needs to pay attention to. The last thing I wanted to mention is also because Indonesia is a consumption-based economy, the Indonesian middle class shrinking income throughout the pandemic made domestic market even more reluctant to spend. And I think this really showed that signify the income construction of Indonesia middle class. And this is really impacting also to the spending. And when the spending, we talk about, again, impacting to the demand. So, of course, it impacts to business because the demand is not there. So, I think this all needs to be addressed while we are looking into the recovery program.
Thank you very much, Ibu Shinta. And I think your point about this being a consumption-driven economy is a very important one. I mean, and what you have emphasized is that at every level, from the poorest households to middle-class ones, spending and consumption really is the thing that's holding the economy back, and that is the thing that has to change. Could I just ask you a bit about, you mentioned the banks. Of course, they're struggling with credit quality, even as companies think that they're paying too high rates of interest. Are companies struggling to meet their obligations to the banks? Do you see any sign of improvement? If you don't, what needs to happen?
Well, definitely, Dominic. If we see, companies are struggling with their cash flow, especially sectors that impacted the most, like tourism sector, for example. Hotels are closing down. They never be able to manage their cash flow properly. We talk about transportation. We talk about retails, and all these are impacted. So obviously they will have problem in paying some of their debt and interest. So I think this is why I think the government right now is focusing on how to have specific sectors as well that greatly hit. And the incentive that's needed, it's not just fiscal incentive. That's why I've been talking a lot about the financial aspect, because this, I think, is the key on being able for the company to survive in terms of their cash flow. So we have been working, actually, SKD, we've been working closely with the OJK, with BI, with the Banking Association, because, one thing is about the state-owned enterprise bank that can be fully controlled by the government, but the private banks, 50% of our credit goes to the private bank. Private bank doesn't move at all. They said, no way. If they're going to be monitored by the what we call the BPK, what's BPK in English, Vinny? I think if the bank
audit agency,
if the bank is controlled, that they have to look at their NPL and things like this. There's no way they're gonna move. So even if you want to push them, I think there has to be an intervention from the government and how to really subsidize the banks. In this case, we have been trying to find solution in terms of maybe the banking sectors needs to be assisted, especially on the supervisor and monitoring aspect. You know, how it can be done so that they will not feel reluctant, because everything what they do now is business as usual. I mean, they look at, you know, you want to get credit for recovery, new capital for recovery, but they are evaluating the same process as they're using during ordinary time. So that's not ever gonna happen. No companies will be able to fulfill the conditions to get new capital. So I think things like this are issues that need to be worked out together. And one thing that's good is our government is listening. But I think we need to really find a specific targeted, also working in specific sectors. We're now looking into incentive for specific sectors like the automotive sector, property sector. They're also on the fiscal incentive. They're also now getting some that can boost some driven some consumption. So we're looking into specific things now rather than just broad big programs. So many work still, and I think it's more always the problem has been the implementation. So in Indonesia, I think even good policies has to be managed with good implementation, and this is something that we in the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry are also supporting the government.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that, Ibu Shinta, and very frank remarks and policy. You know, the problems around implementation. I wish we heard more from government ministers acknowledging those problems, but perhaps we'll come back about how, you know, in further later in the discussion about how to get better implementation. But if for now I could turn to you, Ibu Elim, for your perspective. I mean, for all that the government talks about making Indonesia 4.0, I mean, the fact is that resources still play a very big part in the economy and in the sectors that you're involved with: forestry, pulp and paper, palm oil. Of course, they're great and important employers, as well as a great source of exports. How to get these sectors back in ways that are sustainable, in ways that don't accelerate deforestation, in ways that, you know, don't trash the environment, and in ways that enhance Indonesia's productivity. Tell me about how it looks from your seat, please.
Thank you, Dominic. Yeah. So yeah, we know that this pandemic affected. I think Bu Sinta already explained how this pandemic affected lots of business, and related to our business, especially APP, focuses on forestry, pulp and paper. So talking about the Industrial 4.0, I think our internal company as well has already had a vision that how we bring our business going to Industry 4.0, and to increase the productivity. If we talk about the forestry, and then we already had implementing we call dashboard monitoring to reduce the deforestation, on how we can use technology. And despite the challenges, I think Indonesia and I think some private sector also has begun to turn the tide. Of course, everybody is shocked in the beginning, and I'm sure that everybody start to develop protocol on how the business can adjust with the situation. And our business continue to implement, but maybe like Bu Sinta explained, some medium business will still struggle to face this situation, especially if they depend on the debt on the banking. So our business basically, of course, still has impact in the beginning. But our risk management, and we quickly adjust. Of course, even until now, our headquarter employees still only 25% going to the office until now. But we make sure that all operational, especially in our mills, forestry, could be still going on with the strict protocol of pandemic. And talking to increase the productivity to avoid the deforestation, our R&D continue to measure or monitor our plantation to make sure that the impact, for example, from pest and disease, from the forest fire, we have to make sure that everything should be going on, and then using technology, like I said. Last year, we basically launched our dashboard monitoring in our website using RadarSat 2 to monitor our natural forest or conservation area to make sure that we can identify where is the priority area if there is a illegal activities going on. So using this technology, I think related to this pandemic is really helpful, because of we know that this pandemic situation is very limited to allocate resources manually, right? For something like petrol, is really limited. Even already 1 year, my team usually has to go to the field, but right now it's very limited situation that we can go to the field. We only can depend on the technology. So we use this RadarSat monitoring and combine with other technology to make sure or monitor from the technology side. And of course, we coordinate with our field team to make sure that our goals or our mission still ongoing. And of course, related with our operational in paper mills, we also adjusted and we also support for last year after I think started pandemic, 3 months after our shareholder decided to install the new machine for produce masks to help the availability, because of in the beginning I think in Indonesia we have a very limited availability of masks, and then we produce masks, and then the first time, of course, we make sure that our employee can get the mask, and then also for the CSR. And in the second semester, we start to release the product to the public to make sure that there is a competitive price, because of the price was increased in the first quarter in Indonesia. So that's our and then I think the government also still continue, because of last year there is several technology going on. They want to install some equipment or tools to measure the environmental indicators for industry, and then yes, because of pandemic they postpone, but it's not forget it. And then we still continue and coordinate with the government how this old technology can support government and also industry to make sure that environmental indicator or issue can be measured using technology. I think that's from my side.
Thank you, Ibu Elim. I just one quick question, a follow-up question. You know, some environmentalists and NGOs say that, you know, the needs to expand the paper and the pulp industries would accelerate or at least slow down the deforestation attempts that seem to have borne a certain amount of success in recent years. And in that context, I just wanted to ask you whether during this past year, suppliers of pulp and paper have felt any less pressure from buyers and end consumers on environmental matters, or has the pressure from buyers and end users really been about the same?
I think already reduced, because of we started, especially, we know that in the past APP was targeted or being pushed, right, to how to do the transformation related to the environmental issue. And then we did since 2013 until now. I think almost going to 10 years implementation, and our stakeholders, especially customers, start to bring back the trust. We had a regular update to them every year. We conducted a stakeholder advisory forum to show that how our company has transformed all the operational, especially also very concerned with the environmental issue. And just for information, if some NGOs still, of course, questioning whether APP still commit on our commitment. And just for information, if we talk about the increase the productivity, our productivity in the forestry right now, if I can say compare with Brazil, for example, who has already very high MAI, we call mean annual increment to measure the trees. Basically, we still have a gap about 40% compared to Brazil. So this is our homework, our R&D homework, how to improve our plantation growth to benchmark with Brazil. So this is continue in our operation, and of course, if we have to acquire a new supplier, we already have tools we call supplier evaluation risk assessment to make sure that all our new supplier has to be comply with our commitment. So this is APP prepared.
Eliam, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah,
I'd like to turn to you now, please, Kevin. Your perspective straddles both government and the corporate world. Tell us what you think of the government's handling of the pandemic, and how do its efforts towards recovery look to you? If you could, please also touch upon the omnibus laws, because from some perspectives they seem to favor certain insiders, and then there, and even if that's not the case, there's always the issue of implementation, which of course is a perennial issue in the case of Indonesia.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dominic. I would agree. The pandemic response by the government, as Benny mentioned, has been remarkably good, actually, overall, I think, all things considered, given the circumstances, especially more recently, after a slow start. There was a peak of cases in January, and that caused real distress and tensions as the healthcare system capacity filled right up very quickly. Indonesia's issue is that the population is quite young and a lot of activity takes place outdoors, so the inherent transmission rate is not too high. However, excuse me, the healthcare system capacity is very small, it's very low, so it's prone to reaching capacity. And that may very well happen again, unfortunately, even though detections of infections have trended down since January. They've been on a plateau for the past 10 days. And even though vaccinations are rolling out, it's still a gigantic population and it's a long way to go. And it's happening at a slow rate because of limitations in the supply from mainly from Sinovac in China. So therefore, I'm afraid Indonesia is vulnerable to another wave at some point. So it's critical for the government to expand healthcare capacity right now to accommodate that if it happens.
And Kevin, just on this issue, I mean, Ibu Shinta mentioned the sort of on-off approach to lockdowns, which of course has a lot to do with political will. And Jokowi is not the only leader. Boris Johnson in Britain also found it very hard to take swift and early measures. But presumably this on-off approach, that's not going to change even in the face of possible rising cases. Is that your view?
Yeah, I think what the government's been trying to do is refine its handling. The president definitely wants to avoid strict lockdowns because of the reality that with so many people living in or near poverty, restrictions in economic activity are really literally deadly. So there's been a progressive refinement in the way that restrictions go into effect, such that now they apply on a neighborhood level, not even a sub-district or district level. And that's actually working. Since that went into effect, the case detections have indeed declined. So it's hard to fault the government on that score, actually. And then also another key thing is screening efforts are really improving a lot, because there's a homemade COVID breathalyzer called Genos, which appears to work, and it costs 30,000 rupiah, about $2, and it takes place in about 3 minutes, and it produces an accurate test. And so that's being used in train stations and soon in airports, also antigen testing. So I think with these refinements and better screening and better health protocols, it's going to be a tense period to watch whether those are sufficient to keep infections in check continually, or whether new variants arise and overcome those precautions and cause another spike, but not until the vaccinations roll out and this is really under control can Indonesia really start to think seriously about rebuilding the economy. So it could be a long, difficult year.
Kevin, in terms of the recovery, I mean, can I ask you about the omnibus bill, about scarce state resources and how they should be allocated? About the challenge of SOEs and about how to attract manufacturers, particularly those relocating out of China. Where do you see the chief challenges lie? What are the priorities in your view?
Yeah, sure. The challenge has really always been institutions, and that should be the priority. Unfortunately, so far it is not. What I'm talking about really is the legal system. Investors feel that legal recourse is lacking, and that contributes to risk perceptions that elevate the cost of doing business for everybody, foreign businesses and domestic, large and small. However, what's very encouraging is that apart from that, the administration has been focusing very assertively on a host of other things, which are also problematic and which also matter. And there's a spate of reforms that have come out within the past 5 months that match or probably exceed anything I've seen for 15 years at least. And it includes 2 really big ones, which are labor market rigidities and foreign ownership ceilings. So those are 2 reforms that I had actually given up on ever seeing, but the administration actually accomplished them, along with a host of other things like a land bank for investors. There's better permitting rules for businesses, and plans for improving special economic zones. So all these things sort of nibble around the edges of some of the problems facing investors, especially those in labor-intensive sectors like manufacturing. And I think now it's possible to see opportunities in that particular sector, which is arguably the most important because of the need that Vinny and Shinta mentioned about creating employment and boosting consumption, which is the real driver of GDP in Indonesia.
Could I just ask you, Shinta, whether you share some of Kevin's more upbeat assessment of some of the changes in the past 5 months around labor rigidities, SOEs, permitting rules and the like?
Yeah, I mean, being in business in Indonesia, Dominic, I think the omnibus really give a very big hope and expectation for business. I think we have been trying, I think government has been trying to do structural reform forever. And I think this is now the biggest ever structural reform for Indonesia. So I have to open my head for our government with the leadership of the president that they're there to do this scale of reform. So we've been really following this through all the process and consultation, including with the labor unions as well, the tripartite dialogue and so forth. And I think despite still some reluctance or some apprehension from different sides, but I have to say we really need to make this happen. We really need to ensure that the omnibus can really be implemented. And I just want to touch a few things that's important. I think Indonesia is very much known on over-regulated, over-licensing, And not only that, because of our scale, we have central government, we have local government. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of regulatory framework as well as all the licensing. And as you know, in terms of licensing, which is coming back to Kevin's point on some of the legal certainty as well, Indonesia, has been trying to do what we call the online single submission. So an electronic system of licensing, one stop, So, but for the longest time, all the local government are not able to be integrated into this system. So we are very much looking forward, because this is going to be rolled out by July, that it's all going to be integrated into one electronic system. So this is going to be very interesting. And the change that now Indonesia is following what we call the risk-based licensing. This is also another thing that has been, everybody's kind of waiting for the rollout. And I think this is going to be a major step leap for Indonesia if this actually going to be able to be implemented properly. The other thing also, I do agree about the foreign investment opportunities. As you know, we've been trying to compete, our competitors, our neighbors, Vietnam, all these countries that has been, we've been lagging behind on investment. I think we're trying now to be more competitive with this implementation of this law as well. So first of all, the openness, yes. I mean, now there's only like 6 sectors that's completely closed because of sovereignty. The rest are basically open. And some we serve for small, medium enterprises. Of course, we need to look into that. But there's no longer negative investment list for Indonesia, which I think just for the thought of it, it excites me. I mean, can you believe Indonesia no longer have a negative investment list? So we have now priority list in which actually sectors are being incentivized. So they get tax holiday, tax allowance, and so forth, and those 246 sectors. So it's quite a major, also progress on that. And I think the last thing is also on the labor law. We've been trying to rectify this for the longest time, and finally we're here. It's not, of course, as expected as from business. I mean, it's really a compromise for all, right? I mean, we can't win. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't say this is a perfect document. But definitely lots of progress. I mean, our severance pay it's like the highest, one of the highest in the world, and I think that's been evaluated as well. Our minimum wage has been, the formula now is very consistent. So hopefully all this also we have the unemployment benefit, more certainty of employment. I think this all hopefully give a new hope for Indonesia on its reform. And I'm going back again to, of course, its implementation, and that's why we are here. Business are definitely going to continue scrutinize the implementation and give feedback to our government.
Well, thank you for that generally upbeat view. Kevin, Vinny, I mean, what it was mentioned, of course, the backdrop is that Indonesia has not been as successful as Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand in putting itself, in the middle of Southeast Asian and wider supply chains and production networks, despite hopes that, US-China tensions and more would actually benefit Indonesia. Do you think that Indonesia now has a chance to play that role? And I'd love to ask any of you who would like to comment on the future of electric vehicles, lithium and other batteries, which the government has set great store by, yet still seems to want to sort of slightly micromanage the types of operations it would like to see in Indonesia. I'd love the views of those. Vinny, would you like to dive in here?
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I fully agree that this is, every crisis is an opportunity. And I think this crisis has really brought not only within government together, but also government and private sector. And the level of communication, coordination has increased. And that is promising fingers crossed for some of the issues that Kevin and Chinta mentioned around the implementation, right? Good policies are one thing, implementation the other. But I mean, let's look at the priorities. Priority number one, vaccination, obviously, right? Must be priority for any recovery path. Frankly, Indonesia, compared to any other country in ASEAN, maybe aside from Singapore, is doing really well. And in fact, even last year, they did quite well in that they went out earlier than other countries in terms of vaccine procurement, etc. And this is being rolled out. And being rolled out well, with the two caveats, of course, is the supply side. And secondly, and even there with biopharma and one of the leading vaccine manufacturers in the region, Indonesia is relatively well positioned. But then, of course, the other caveat is also the extent to which the deployment into more rural and remote areas. And as we know, obviously, Indonesia is logistically one of the biggest challenges worldwide in terms of vaccination. But so far that looks good. Second, on the recovery, if you look at the policy making that is going on right now and the priority setting around people, in bureaucrat speak, I suppose, human capital development, on education and skills. A lot of thinking is happening, not only about the skilling, the reskilling, the upskilling, in terms of also the crisis, how to get those who lost a job back into jobs, but also in terms of the next step, what are the skills required for a modern economy? And we see that in terms of demand for our support for the high level staff, the innovation centers, and the R&D that is required to become a modern economy. Secondly, health. We spoke briefly earlier about the health ministry. The new leadership in the health ministry not only is doing quite well in terms of tackling the pandemic, but also now talking already about medium and longer term health security and social protection that we touched on earlier. I think now the crisis has shown some of the strength of the existing social assistance system, the protection system, which is going quite well, but also some of the gaps, and these are being addressed. On the structural reform, and Kevin and Chinta spoke about the omnibus bill, and about manufacturing, but so there is certainly a lot of work and thinking going into productive industries, strengthening manufacturing sector. And in fact, it was way before the crisis, but now an additional momentum. I think also an additional momentum, Shinta, is on, if I'm not mistaken, on small, medium enterprises support. It is clearly recognized by the government that this is where the workforce is. And I suppose part of the omnibus bill will also be supportive. The other big area in terms of structural reforms is the momentum that we are seeing in terms of state enterprise reforms, which is politically not an easy topic. It's a sensitive topic, but it represents, SOEs represent a large share of the economy, and therefore also of potentially for growth and efficiency, and also in terms of competition, making room for the private sector. So there is a lot of thinking and work going on in this area. And the last, if I may, point to touch on and close to all our heart is the green recovery, right? So as the recovery path is being rolled out, how can it be greened and becoming a greener? And I think the pandemic obviously has shown the rather threatening probable link between climate change and pandemics, but also in terms of the infrastructure investments, which still is a flagship for the government. How can that be in quality and green and sustainable? I suppose I actually strongly feel that the international momentum, the COP, and also next year's chairmanship of Indonesia for G20. This will all create a very positive momentum and that has built up and is being accelerated through the crisis. So I'm quite optimistic. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Vinny. I'd love to ask for some reactions. Elim, anything you heard from Vinny, does anything chime with you? And indeed, can the pulp and paper industry play a part in this, in the message, the green message, the message of a green recovery in particular, but also other areas, labor market reforms, they must be relevant too. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, Dominic. I think everyone agree that the scale and impact of the pandemic has been unprecedented, especially for the country like us, right? I think we had discussed, and then the government of Indonesia has been engaging private sectors in addressing the situation related to the how pulp and paper can contribute to this situation, especially if we talk about the labor. So we believe businesses do not operate in vacuum, since society as a whole must be healthy also for business to be healthy. And a part of our role in sustainability over the last year has been focused on how we help communities, because we know that if we talk about the forestry, a lot of communities living surrounding the area, and then how we can living with harmony with these rural communities. So we know that they don't have the same level of infrastructure with other communities. And then our role, especially nearby with them, how we can remain safe and then see their livelihoods protected as well. So before a pandemic, basically we already had one program we call DMPA as a program, as an integrated forestry and farming system. And then we've been focused this program as our CSR efforts to support the local community to be able to survive. And then during the pandemic, also not only how to survive with their economy, and then we also provide a donation for food, vitamin, masks, and then a provisioning hand wash station in public spaces to support them, to ensure that they will survive. And luckily, some of our community program that already started since 2016, they can sell, they could sell their product and then increase. During the pandemic, they increased the income more than 50% because of their focus on the some products that really needed during the pandemic. And then we know that this is our effort as a part of how we can assist, provide assistance to the local small, medium, and micro enterprise.
Thank you, Eliam. We are regrettably running short of time, coming towards the end of our session. Mm-hmm. Kevin, if I could please ask you for some brief reactions to some of the more upbeat and optimistic assessments you've heard from fellow panelists: improvements in the health ministry, the labor market reforms, the ending of the negative investment list, R&D, and anything that you would like to chip in with here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would say, Dominic, that the most important political trend over the past 15 years has been direct, free and fair elections for Indonesia's 540 or so regional heads. And so what that means is that little by little, here and there are provincial governors, mayors, and district chiefs emerging who care about bringing in investment and creating jobs in order to benefit their constituents and then win re-election. That's a trend which contrasts with the old mindset, which was to fleece investors, basically.
Well, that's a very welcome trend, Kevin. But what are the implications of deferring regional and local elections now until 2024? Because in a way, there are sort of, it's a bit back to the new order. I mean, if one takes a sort of slightly cynical view of this process, of course, elections are promised, and there's a sense in aligning all elections. But There's a risk there as well, is there not?
Yeah, absolutely. So the general trend has helped improve governance, and so to the point about attracting investment, which is going to be really key, especially for manufacturing and labor-intensive sectors. There's possibilities now in certain regions around the country, especially Central Java. That's a place where there's a confluence of factors coming together. But more specifically, within the next 2 years, there's a decision by the president to opt out of basically the regular schedule of these elections for 270 districts over the next 2 years, and instead they'll take place in 2024. And basically that just deprives people of a chance to shape their leadership. So it's a real shame. It's unfortunate. It's a setback.
And that's certainly something that we at The Economist will be watching for. We have, I'm afraid, run out of time, but I hope you all agree that in this session we covered a lot of ground. We didn't shirk from the challenges of the pandemic that faced Indonesia, the difficulties of climbing out from the crisis into recovery. But all of you also highlighted the opportunities, the points of light from labor market reforms to a somewhat more open attitude to foreign investment, to concern for those at the very bottom. So I would just like to thank all my panelists, Elim Shritaba, Kevin O'Rourke, Shinta Kamdani, Vinny Vicklin, for their fantastic contributions. And if I could please invite the audience in a virtual round of applause with me for them. Very big thanks again. Now, the next session is at 2:30 p.m. Jakarta time, and that's for our interview with Agus Gumiwang, the Minister of Industry. Once again, very many thanks from me. Bye-bye.